I want to move us forward with the next recommendation that we had, which was talking about staying diligent. So continuously monitoring and evaluating those efforts, inviting feedback and adapting and customizing your approach. And that leads me to a question for Peter here about what he might be able to share about customizing his approach as a service provider in the Hope region of BC.
Yeah, so delivering services in a small rural community for many years, the piece that I really value is the recognition of rural expertise. I think that so often, as a culture, we look to the large urban centres as the place of knowledge and understanding, but there is a wisdom in small rural communities, especially about that place. And so, my focus has very much been about building positive relationships. And I think if you spoke to anybody in service delivery and hope, they would say that free reign tends to be the kind of Switzerland country that just is friends with everybody. And so we have built those linkages and those understandings between us and service delivery agencies, but also educators and government and faith leaders. And I think you do that because you're resident, you're local, you have that awareness of what's going on in the community. And so, a little while ago, a principal of an alternate school said to me, in programming, could you include driver's training? And I said, well, it's not typically something that's funded, but I'll put it in the proposal. And to the government's great success, they included it. And we have had so many people going through that driver's training and getting their driver's license. So, from a transportation perspective, just having your driver's license means that you can then be more employable. So, I think that recognizing that is important for us as service delivery agencies, but I think it's also important for government to recognize it as they're funding um, rural service providers to take into account the fact that those people living and delivering service in that community, often for many years, possess an understanding of that community that is deep and broad. And I think that's true in rural communities and indigenous communities, that government needs to hold that concept of that rural expertise.
Yeah, and that's really hard to quantify sometimes, right? Like when we're trying to make our case, it's hard to quantify that depth of knowledge in a language that appeals to the policy constraints that are there. So it's wonderful to hear that you made a case for transportation because we know that's just such a barrier. So one of the things we're going to get the group to look at is what metrics and measures are you like currently collecting or requesting? So if you're a funder or a policy representative, this would be what are you requesting? If you're providing services, like what are you collecting? And this is a bit of a word cloud, so you'll have the opportunity to type in some specific words, and as you see those words being shared, they'll get bigger and bigger. So we invite you just to share just a few, maybe the top metrics or measures are the most important ones that you're currently collecting. And for those of you who are just joining us, we're using Menti.com. You can use the code 36721402. I believe Megan also popped that into the chat a little higher up as well. So we've got outcomes is the biggest one, successful employment, number of participants, employers.
Just as you're typing, I'll mention, Eve talked about the importance of relationships, and then somebody posted in chat, the government doesn't recognize the hard work that we're doing. And so I think that it is really, really important that we recognize that the data that we collect matters. and it's okay to collect more than what's required. And so there's some data that's going to be required, but nobody was asking Peter to collect data on how many people needed a driver's license. And so in his proposal, he was able to add something that had come out, from community conversations. And obviously, we're seeing outcomes huge now. Cassie mentioned that word clouds get bigger, they also get smaller. So as some words get big and more words are added, then it's harder to read the rest, but you'll get this PowerPoint slide later.
Yeah.
But I think that all of the other things that are on there might give you some ideas about data to collect that will influence and back up some of the anecdotal information that you're trying to share with your funders about the hard work that you're doing.
Yeah, sharing the stories within our research was a really, really important focus. And so I'm happy to see success stories being a big item here. And as I'm looking at what's included, I see that some are really tangible, like the number of jobs, a 90-day milestone, wait times, employment rates. Like some of those are easy to really quantify. And so other things like a client testimonial, like how do you quantify that? Like how do you demonstrate that in a meaningful way to communicate it to funders, and vice versa for funders to communicate, why metrics that they're looking for might be meaningful for people to collect on site in their communities. So I've got one more Menti, one more word cloud. And so this one relates to what metrics and measures you would like to collect. So not what you're required to collect or that you are currently collecting, but what would you like to collect in terms of metrics and measures? Or again, if we've got people from policy and government here, what metrics or measures would you like to be able to get from government or from government funded groups or other community providers? So interesting, we've got it's bopping around a little bit, but we had training aspirations and advancement wishes. So it's almost like those like long-term goals that maybe aren't short-term. Again, we've got some success stories, client satisfaction, some skill pieces here, resources used by clients, enhanced independence. Oh, and I like this one, success in the client's words. You'll notice in the research that we shared, because it is a story-based approach, there's the reason the report itself is so very long is because we have lots of clippets of the stories from the people who participated in the research, from community representatives, from employers, and from individuals as well. And in the podcast series that we have, we actually have voice actors sharing their stories as well. So all of these additional measures can help sort of provide nuance and context and support you in making a case for an enhanced understanding of the needs of your participants, the needs of your communities, and maybe justify additional funding sources or partnerships that might be able to assist with some of those things that we know are related to the employment experiences. So I'm going to let that keep running in the background, but we are going to move forward to our fourth recommendation, which was working together. And I know that we've talked about this as a thread sort of throughout the other recommendations as well, that none of these things are happening in isolation. So we, called for people to look around their community for opportunities to collaborate on solutions, knowing that we can't be all things to all people, and especially in rural and remote spaces where there is, not as many people working within the employment centers. There's also maybe limited opportunities in terms of the number of clients that they can see because of that. And so partnerships and coordinated efforts are sort of really important going forward. And I wanted to invite Janet to speak a little bit on this, because in her role at Aspect, she's often this connector of diverse groups that are within that career development ecosystem. And so maybe share a little bit about that partnership and collaboration that you are working on.
Thanks, Cassie. Yeah, so I've been doing the work that I've been doing for various industries for probably about 30 years now. And one of the approaches that I look at for on behalf of Aspect is how do I represent the needs of our members most first. But the overall umbrella question I ask is how can I help? And I'm sort of looking when I meet somebody new, a new organization, new member of an organization, new government official, whomever I'm reaching out to, is sort of trying to figure out what their needs are and figuring out how I can help to do that. And what do I have to offer and what do they have to offer? And together we can figure out what our shared goals are and how we can get there and be stronger. And it's when I'm working with government, that was a huge shift for me. When I'm working with the funders, was trying to figure out, well, what are the constraints or what are the challenges that they're having, and what can I do to help out? So, for example, years ago we were working on a project, contract for the government, and they just didn't have enough staff to service what was needed, and because it was outward facing, working with employers, it was causing a challenge, and it was jeopardizing the program. So I was able to send an email just confirming what the wait times were like and what the challenges were being for those that were accessing the grant and the service. And by doing that, the executive director I was working with in government was able to go to their superiors, and they had the evidence to be able to get more funding for more staff to service the contract. And that's kind of what I'm looking at when we're doing advocacy work on behalf of the employment service providers in BC and across Canada as well, because we do that work as well, is to try to figure out what are the needs and how can I help? And does it fall under my greater mandate of the work that I'm doing as CEO of Aspect? We have connections that are not only in BC, in Canada, but all internationally, because everybody wants to know how are they doing it in other jurisdictions? How are they solving some of these challenges in other areas? And I think that one of the things that's fairly universal in the work that I've done is that the contract funding creates silos that nobody likes. And those silos are and breaking down those silos and reaching across from one silo to another is kind of my life's work, is helping people to connect on those areas. And I think whether you are an employer or you are working in government or you are a career development professional, I think that that's a good way to move forward rather than just saying, I want more money or I want more resources, to sort of look at what are the challenges of the people that you're working with and how we can collaboratively work together to find a pathway forward. We may not be able to do what we want to do right away, but knowing that it's a long process and it can last, a lifetime. I know some of the people on this call have been working in this realm for their entire lifetime. And it's exciting when you make ways forward or when you educate people who didn't know something, and so that you all have a shared understanding.
Thank you, Janet. We had a comment about networking abilities being very cultural as well. And so we know that service providers have cultural diversities too. And that notion of networking can feel really uncomfortable for many. That's why I like the term collaborating or connecting better than networking. But yeah, any thoughts from our group about networking and cultural differences before we move into a breakout group?
Yeah, it's interesting, Cassie. Just the word networking can have a lot of negative connotations, just like the word advocacy can have negative connotations. And that's kind of why I've changed my language more to collaborating. But I'm sure that down the road, it will also have some negative connotations. But it's interesting when you talk about culture and language and inclusion. That's a dynamic playing field for all of us as we learn.
Absolutely. And knowing that all of those like different layers of the sector may have sort of groups as well. There's someone who mentioned the clickiness of some groups, and breaking through into those spaces can always be challenging too. I think breaking in with not an ask, but an offer can help as well. But let's move forward in the spirit of collaboration, giving you the opportunity to connect within. I'm going to shuffle the groups a little bit here as well, so hopefully you'll be paired up with some different people. But we're going to want you to discuss what programs, services, or supports you're currently aware of in your community. And we're hoping that in this sharing of what's available out there, you might have some ideas about what could be done in your community from others in your group, what's missing, what's needed. And we also want to have some conversation about suitable programs, like ensuring that they can be sustainable without solely relying on government funding. Like what other pockets of funding can be available to ensure that you can get these types of programs? Who can you look to? Who can you partner with? And how can that be done in unique ways?